What's up, guys and gals of the movement world? It's Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi, coming to you once again for Football Beyond the Stats in our Movement Play of the Week, this week for Week 12 of the 2022 National Football League season. This week, we're going to get into Garrett Wilson, number 17 rookie for the New York Jets. And obviously, the Jets were coming off of a little bit of drama in New York, as it sometimes is the case, but particularly this past week and going into Week 12, Robert Saleh, the head coach of the New York Jets, announced that they were going to be benching second-year man Zach Wilson, who was their starting quarterback. Filling in for him was going to be Mike White, a guy that ended up this week here in Week 12 against the Chicago Bears, absolutely balling. In fact, I think you could put his performance against the Bears, even though it is the Bears, up against any other quarterback playing this particular week in the National Football League. Part of this reason is because he had a standout performance from his new standout rookie wide receiver, Garrett Wilson. And if you don't remember, back before the 2022 National Football League draft, I actually did a breakdown, a movement skill deep dive on Garrett Wilson. And if you will remember back to that, and I will put that in the show notes below or in the comment section, that I believe that Garrett Wilson has the potential of being the most expressive and skillful and dexterous mover in the 2022 National Football League draft class across positions. And it's because of things like we're about to see from him today on this particular play as to why I'm able to make that case and make that argument for him. So in true Football Beyond the Stats Movement Play of the Week fashion, let's go ahead and dive on in at full speed. And there's not going to be a lot of layers to this on the surface. But what you're going to find is there's some things that we can and should investigate, and then we're going to be able to have a discussion as to how we might be able to facilitate that. So we're going to let it run through a few more times. If you didn't already pick it up here, there's number 17, Garrett Wilson, who obviously was lined up to Mike White's right on the formation. Obviously, you're going to be able to see some layers and some nuances at the line of scrimmage as he gets a lot of early separation, and that's part of Garrett Wilson's game and craft. But the part that we're really going to draw attention to as we watch it one more time at full speed here before we dive into 50% is this perceptual attunement, this perceptual sensitivity, and the adaptable creative nature that flows from it. Because this is super nifty. And obviously, I don't want you to miss the subtleties. Even though this play in and of itself is going to be less layered than it typically would be on our movement play of the week, where we usually will see some simultaneous and successive affordances and obviously guys showing sort of this matrix dimensional level to their movement skill. I don't want you guys to miss what we find from Garrett Wilson here today. So even though it's going to look rather simple, it actually is highly complex. And I want to make sure that we give credit where credit's due. Obviously, haven't figured this out now as we go into 50% speed. You see me circling with my mouse here. That's Garrett Wilson down on the bottom of the screen, split wide right, but not all that wide, obviously. So the Jets will run a lot of this more bunch type of formation here. And obviously with Garrett Wilson's early creativity, early in routes, he's able to get a bunch of separation and keep guys guessing, keep defenders, in this case, obviously this defensive back, guessing as to what he's going to do tactically, but also what he's about to do technically. So he's doing this all in a true setup fashion. And this is why back when we rewind back to April and May, leading up into the draft, as to why I put Garrett Wilson ahead of his Ohio State teammate, Chris Olave, who now plays for the New Orleans Saints. We see this creativity. We see this true novelty from him really frequently. And we're going to see it here at the line of scrimmage, just even as he makes the defensive back, and you can only see it obviously very, very briefly. And obviously some of this is dependent on the principles of play, if you will, the tactical strategy, both on the offensive and defensive side, knowing that that's all part of the context that shapes the content. However, if we just look at this interaction right here between 17 and what I believe is 22, this defensive back, this corner down at the bottom of your screen, watch the interaction, the information movement coupling. That's not where we're going to focus and feature and showcase Garrett Wilson's movement skill today. But for him to become a bona fide superstar at the wide receiver position, this is going to be one of the calling cards. Think of a guy like a Devontae Adams, a Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, a Keenan Allen. Even if we were to rewind back to an Odell Beckham Jr. or an Antonio Brown 5 or 6 years ago, it's this line of scrimmage creativity and the adaptability from it, where they're able to sort of download information as to what a corner is doing and what a corner is biting on, that leads them to be able to set guys up in a true repetition without repetition type of fashion. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity to speak to that. If you go look at my Garrett Wilson movement skill deep dive from before the draft, you're going to see that highlighted a little bit more than this. Okay. But really, it's what Garrett Wilson is about to do here. And obviously, this is a deep intermediate crosser, or intermediate to deep crosser. And, I want to make sure that we don't miss this. I want to unpack this appropriately enough because I think it starts to set the tone to what we might be able to do to guide and channel, sort of shape the perceptions and intentions of our skill players. And really, it is just about the skill players. It's all 22 players across the field, trying to figure out how we might be able to educate one's attention to perpetually and tightly feed into one's intentions or one's aims to interact. Okay. So while the ball is approaching him, look at right here, right now. Once he's already caught the ball, let's not miss this, guys and gals. I'm going to show you over and over and over again because I want you to look at this glance as he secures the ball and he moves, begins to act to perceive. JJ Gibson, perceive to act, act to perceive, in this tight reciprocal nature and relationship. We see it right here that we're not trying to pick up that information to recall some sort of way of acting, but we're connecting to that information in a really functional fashion so it can be purposeful, it can be practical, it can be useful, and we can determine as a performer or as a human as to what opportunities may exist to act. And what we see here is this is really, really highly mature and evolved stuff from Garrett Wilson, right? As this ball is approaching him, we know that he's getting in this sort of soft spot. He's going to pick up where 22 is, the guy who is defending him, obviously off the line of scrimmage, who sort of passed him across the middle of the field. And we see Eddie Jackson, who happened to unfortunately go down with what appears to be a non-contact injury. I don't know if it's ankle, Achilles potentially, or maybe a foot type of injury. I don't know at this moment as we record this. And honestly, I'm going to be completely transparent. I didn't look up to see what actually happened to him, but it's definitely something on his left foot or ankle complex. Now, that being said, he's expecting, he being Garrett Wilson, is expecting 2 defenders to be back there. But after this guy in his outstretched arms, he goes up, he comes down, and he actually hits the turf. Garrett Wilson now has at least what we would refer to as a simpler movement problem in order to solve. But he still has threats. That threat is right here in the form of number 22. And look at him right here, right now. Let me grab my my arrow if I could. Look at him right here, right now. Turn his body, act to perceive, because it's there that he will then be able to perceive to act. Remember, it's a mutual reciprocal relationship, environment and performer, problem and solver, perception and action, intertwined, interwoven. But let's remember our intentions are scaffolded in there as well. Okay. So as we tell this movement problem solving story, part of this narrative that is threaded throughout is Garrett Wilson's extraordinary perceptual sensitivity and attunement to the specifying information about how he can act. But he knows he now has some time afforded to him as well. Even though he's about to make a very abrupt, evasive agility, change of direction action, he's acting very patiently here as he turns around and gets moving. Look at this deceptiveness. We see this, and I don't want you guys to miss it. Look at as he turns and moves in a very ownership type of speed and pace. We often talk here at Football Beyond the Stats about ownership speed. Now, there are times to be truly abrupt, and there are times that if you can act more patiently, it can allow for the perceptual pickup of more accurate information sources. And that's what we get right here from Garrett Wilson. Even though it is in 50% speed, we can see that Garrett Wilson is sort of moving at 50 or 60% speed, at least as he secures the catch, turns and looks at 22. And remember, behavior affords behavior. Let's not miss it. Look at Wilson act, look at 22 act in that hesitation. It gets him hesitating just enough. I talked months and months ago in the Garrett Wilson movement skill deep dive about him being sort of this perceptual attunement savant, if you will. And he's really able to pick up fine nuances about the ways guys are behaving, and then he acts accordingly. So let's not miss this again. And I know I keep encouraging you guys not to do so, not to miss this, but we see, that's why I'm showing you over and over and over again. And I really wanted to feature this problem solution dynamics, or these problem solution dynamics, and this problem solving interaction here between 17 and 22. So let's look at it. Behavior affords behavior. 22 leans on this left side. We see him right here. If I could get my spotlight out, we see him lean on this. Okay. Now, he knows, he being Garrett Wilson, knows that if he can get 22 just moving a little bit more from left to right here, which is what he's about to do because he's completely loaded on this left leg. If he starts moving, 22 that is, starts moving to his right down this arrow, Garrett Wilson is going to open up a ton of space. And no one can convince me that if we go a frame or two back here, that Garrett Wilson, when he gives this peek, oops, let me get back in here to the full screen. When he gives this peek back over his left shoulder, and now he turns and moves, that no one can convince me that he doesn't see 4, Eddie Jackson, laying here grabbing, I guess, I don't know exactly what he's grabbing right now, but I thought it was a foot ankle injury, the way that it looked at the other glances. And now we begin to see this from him. Even right now, he's picking up specifying information as to how he can act. And he's doing so in a very online fashion. The world is its best model. Let's pick up the information as it unfolds. Not about snapshots that we're taking in the brain. It's about how this information is unfolding as we interact within it. So now look at where Garrett Wilson is looking. He's looking 222, right? But what else can he see? He can see that there isn't someone there. Okay. And my arrows kind of do this. I understand that. And I am speculating or hypothesizing as to what he might be able to pick up here. But I've seen him act enough, not only in his Ohio State film, as I highlighted back in the spring, but even this far into the National Football League season, his rookie year in the NFL, is he is able to give these glances and pick up information that he then uses to coordinate and couple his own movement actions in interaction with, which is really layered and evolved stuff. And now we see him act to where he moves from right to left in his own fashion. specifying information, even though he's not looking at 22, he knows that 22 had only certain affordances that are available to him. So if he can get him moving that way, it opens up this opportunity to break it back inside. Super nuanced, super evolved, highly evolved stuff here from a very young receiver who I believe is on the verge of superstardom. And then once he gets that guy moving, 22 that is, with enough speed, now he acts abruptly, right? And it isn't always about acting abruptly. I've talked before about agility not being about the most rapid or fast action, but it's about the most timely action. And it's about acting in a way that functionally fits the problem. In this respective problem, where interpersonal distance has now gotten very, very close, right? And 22, if I can act quickly enough myself, 22 is moving back towards the boundary now, or back to the numbers in the boundary. Coupling those two information sources together to his information, Garrett Wilson knows he must act quickly here. Otherwise, 22 will be able to adapt and get himself turned around. But he isn't able to do so, and that's just enough for Garrett Wilson to set up this affordance, aka the opportunity for him to continue to act in a way where there is a ton of space. I mean, we're talking obviously 30-ish type of yards, that maybe even a little bit more, because he's almost to the numbers here. So we're talking about more than that of that 53 and a third type of field, right? And with 4 being down on the ground, Garrett Wilson kind of puts both of them on his poster accordingly. But let's not miss that he just continues to perceive and act, right? And some of it there is just for good measure, because obviously he has a lot of field and a lot of green grass to work with. And not only that, but he gets early separation from 22 based on this quick, abrupt action. And he gets right into that early acceleration mechanics, looks over his shoulder to his left, to his right, and then a few more glances over that left shoulder. And you see some super skillful, highly dexterous stuff, very attuned, very intentional, meaning open and responsive to this rich landscape of affordances. But he knows how he must aim to interact based on how the world itself is unfolding. So, how could we actually train this? How could we channel this type of attunement and sensitivity? I think first and foremost, it is to be done in very representative ways, right? Like, you can't tell a guy, hey, just look and see this thing. You're not telling them where to look, or I should say, you're not telling them what they need to see, but you're telling them essentially what might be out there, and then you're presenting them opportunities to search and explore through it. Or at least that's how I feel strongly that we could go about educating one's attention. And this attention in this education of attention type of way is different than what some might refer to as a focus of attention. Okay, focus of attention research being from Gabriel Wolf, Nick Winkelman, and the like. I'm not talking about that type of focus of attention where we would focus externally or internally. I'm talking about an education of attention, and more appropriately stated from Jacobs and Michaels, in a direct learning, direct perception fashion, what is out there in the world for one to perceive and utilize to skillfully interact in accordance to what is out there. Okay, so really this is about perceptual attunement, aka sensitivity to the specifying information. But the information in these alive movement problems, guys and gals, I'm going to call out the elephant in the room, it is never the same. So we have to give players exposure and experience in educating their attention or becoming more perceptually sensitive and attuned. Okay. Hopefully that makes some sense. So, what could we do? We could advise players in the midst of these types of really alive slices. We've talked before about slices or snippets of the game. In fact, 2 weeks ago, we talked about it with Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson. Last week, we talked about it in week 11 with Cordero Patterson and Travis Kelce. That these snippets or slices of the game can be crafted in very representative ways. And so we could have a player, and even if we only have, let's say we only have 3 or 4 players even at our disposal to create these slices or snippets. This is something that this particular type of movement problem is something that I've set up frequently. As long as I have a quarterback, I've set it up for a receiver where we might have a number of defenders. We could have one defender entering the space along with this wide receiver, and he's receiving the ball, and that defender is coming from a different place in space. Typically, I'm not going to be using this type of, let me get a star if I could. I'm typically not using this amount of width of space if I have that few of defenders, because once the skilled player makes this first guy miss, then he's really just off to the races, right? It doesn't have a lot of complexity. So usually I'm going to narrow this width, and I'm probably going to do so in a fashion where it is maybe about, let's call it anywhere from 10 to 15 yards-ish wide. And then usually about, again, 10 to 15 yards long too. So obviously I'd have to put my star down a little further. So what we would find is that maybe that workspace size would be like so, right? And you see me just going and drawing, and we'd have that receiver enter this workspace and a defender entering that workspace as well from a different place in space. Okay. So this wide receiver right here and this defender could be both entering this workspace from different places. And I'm going to draw a bunch of arrows. Obviously, we know that Garrett Wilson entered the workspace here before he got the ball. All of a sudden, he enters that space, receives the ball, and quickly has to recognize or pick up information about where this guy was coming from and where he may be headed. We could have this guy then, in a repetition without repetition fashion, start in different places and enter the workspace in different directions, right? It could be a safety acting as if a safety. We could have him manned up with this receiver as he enters the space. Obviously, we can have the receiver enter the space differently each and every time, right? So that creates the initial conditions to where it's different every single time it unfolds. However, we wouldn't stop there, because obviously no two problems are ever the same, thus neither are any two solutions. We then would expose these players to different interpersonal interactions that are going to take place, because every single time, if those problems are different, information variables to become attuned to and sensitive to, such as interpersonal distances I'm showing there. It could be bearing angle of where this player is, how this player is moving and where he's moving to. So location and orientation might change. And obviously orientation of the body and its movement capabilities and actions as a whole as well. What direction is he going based on how he's behaving? What direction could he go based on how his body posture and kinematics are unfolding? All of these information variables, guys and gals, are things to become more sensitive and attuned to. And if the player, in this case, the Garrett Wilson-like player, our receivers, our tight ends, our running backs, whomever it may be, are interacting in these types of experiences more frequently, the problem and solution dynamics itself and how behavior affords behavior will begin to channel more adaptable movement behaviors, or because it requires it, right? Those alive movement problems require decisions to be made based on where a defender is. And then, of course, it doesn't have to be 1v1. we could have this guy, obviously in an optimal way here, as Eddie Jackson, unfortunately, like I said, falls down on the play due to injury. We could have a 2v1 scenario and situation that unfolds. So now that player must become attuned and sensitive to the behaviors of two players, and how he acts will be determined based on where both of those players are and how they might be continuing to act. And of course, we can add more complexity. We can add more layers. And as that happens, usually if it's through a teammate entering the space, as we see number 11, I don't know who that is, kind of jogging off to the side, we could have him enter the space. We could have a defender that would be coming from behind, which is usually what I would attempt to do here. Obviously this guy falls down, but we would have different problems to solve, variable problems to solve, but we could do that through these slices and snippets. And as we do, guys and gals, as I'm drawing so much on this, what we can also do is encourage the player who's doing the receiving in this case to have more search processes that will unfold. We could encourage him to pick up that information more rapidly. And as they do that, they likely, if we just tell them where to look but not what to see, or where they could look and maybe potentially pick up information sources from how someone else is behaving, that is how I believe we start to get these types of interactions where a player just gets really comfortable doing so. And of course, then we can encourage things such as creativity and novelty and adaptability. Those are more global intentions or initiatives that we would want to take place in each and every one of our learning environments and within most of the problems that our players are solving. So some super nuanced, super evolved stuff from Garrett Wilson, who, like I've made the mention, is sort of a perceptual attunement savant this early on in his National Football League career. But I think it has come from his exposure and his experience to a certain degree, but it's only going to get better and go up from here as he becomes more sensitive to how NFL players and NFL problems unfold, how NFL players behave, and how NFL problems unfold. So for Sean Mishka, movement play of the week for Football Beyond the Stats in week 12 here. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please give me the thumbs up, hit the like button for me, maybe share it on social media, share it across. If you want to interact, put some comments in the section below, and I would love to interact with you about this. Hopefully some of that makes some sense, and hopefully you're able to continue to tell the movement problem solving story for the players that you watch each and every Sunday. Thank you, guys and gals. I will see you guys in week 13.